Hello Internet, my name is ZmosHD, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about NuanceBro and his many lies. Really there's not much to say. This guy's kind of just an embarrassment. He'll lie and misrepresent the truth at will. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Amazing stuff here. I'm not a researcher, obviously, so maybe some of you researchers, if you're listening, you might be like, "Ugh, I don't know, I don't like the way he said that," but this is basically what the study shows. So I gotta say, guys, the research I've been finding on the chloroquine and the hydroxychloroquine stuff has been very promising to see. They've been doing this, it seems like, in South Korea. It's in their guidelines. They have a very low death rate. Hopefully we can get this happening in the United States very quickly. Hopefully the FDA, doesn't put up a lot of red tape and roadblocks and requiring clinical testing and things like that. If people are on their deathbeds right now, they have a high chance of dying, or they're about to go on ventilators or whatever, they're high-risk populations, they're above, 65, 70, whatever, and they want the option to take something like this, why not? This is a drug that's been on the market for a long time. They've done studies on this. They know how safe or unsafe it is. Maybe they don't know necessarily with COVID-19 and they haven't done the studies yet, but if people are on their deathbed, Trump's passed things like right to try, or he's put the rules in place for right to try. Why not right to try this and hopefully stay alive?
Well, we don't right to try this because it can hurt people. And studies show that it's not only ineffective, but it can have serious problems with your heart, which, by the way, the elderly have more susceptibility to heart problems. But hey, just try out dangerous drugs that we don't really have enough testing for to claim their effectiveness. Because why not, In other news, inject bleach because, why not?
Oh man, don't get me started on the wage gap. We'll save that for another time.
So, what can we do? Tell your friends and family about the pink tax, because awareness is the first step to change.
Absolutely. Tell your friends and family about the pink tax and how it's not actually a thing, and show them this video and others like it in order to educate them. All right.
Well, the pink tax is real. It's a valid idea that's studied in economics, and I have evidence for that.
And those children not becoming citizens would violate the provision of the 14th Amendment that talks about natural-born citizens. Now, there's really not a ton of precedent for that, and we're going to get into precedent in a second, but the idea that there's precedent for illegal immigrants coming here, having children, and those children becoming full-fledged citizens, there really isn't precedent for that. But the part that they tend to leave out is the other portion of the 14th Amendment, where it talks about natural-born citizens and naturalized citizens, but it says, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So let's talk about the specific 14th Amendment provision that talks about natural-born citizenship. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the states wherein they reside. Now, as you can see, it has two different requirements, either all persons born or naturalized. So naturalization is obviously the process by which you go when you're not a citizen, but then you apply for citizenship and then you become a citizen through whatever laws we determine that, makes you a citizen. But the other one is being born. But both of them are contingent upon being subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, what does that mean? Well, the people who are opposed to the Trump executive action are suggesting that it means, well, if you're within the United States and you're subject to our laws, as in, if you murder someone, you can be arrested for murder. You just commit some sort of crime, you're subject to the jurisdiction. We can take you to court and put you to prison. You're subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, others, people who are proponents for Trump's interpretation that would allow for something like this executive action, argue that if you are a foreigner and you fall under foreign laws, that you are not under the full jurisdiction of the United States. Now, this would apply to people like diplomats, for example. So diplomats, if they come here and they commit some sort of crime or whatever, they wouldn't necessarily be arrested because sometimes they have diplomatic immunity. This would also historically apply to native tribes. So when they were born, they wouldn't become U.S. citizens automatically because they are part of their own sort of nation, even though they're technically within the borders of the United States. And it's like a sort of quasi-independent nation, not exactly, but they argue that they weren't citizens. But that later changed, I think, somewhere in the 1920s. But there's a great article, Ben Shapiro just actually wrote it over on the Daily Wire, so we're going to quote some of that. So a portion of the article says, the key phrase here is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. As Ilya Shapiro of Cato Institute points out, that phrase was originally written to exclude the children of Native American tribes from American citizenship, since those children were subject to the jurisdiction of Native American governance, as well as the children of foreign diplomats and soldiers from abroad fighting on American land. The amendment was specifically written in order to guarantee the citizenship of freed slaves and their children, in order to abrogate the Supreme Court's despicable Dred Scott ruling. Now, the article also goes into historical precedent about this issue. In 1884, the Supreme Court ruled that a Native American born under the jurisdiction of a Native American tribe could not unilaterally make himself a United States citizen, since no one can become a citizen of a nation without its consent. In 1898, the Supreme Court ruled that Wong Kim Ark, a child born in the United States to legal resident Chinese immigrants, was included in the birthright citizenship provided by the 14th Amendment. In 1982, the Supreme Court ruled that for a state to deny public benefits to the child of illegal immigrants would be illegal. Justice William Brennan noted in a footnote. Now, of the three cases, the last one is a little bit dicey because it was in a footnote, which is what in legal circles they call dicta. It's not really binding. But in the other two cases, you can see that they kind of fall on the opposite sides of things. So one talks about a legal resident falling under birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. But the former case in 1884 that ruled on the Native American born under the jurisdiction of a Native American tribe talked about how no one can become a citizen of a nation without its consent. So you could easily argue that the same sort of case applies to illegal immigrants who are not members of this nation, they're not citizens of this nation, they're not legal residents here, but they're actually from a foreign nation and they're entering illegally into this country, so therefore their child could also be considered not part of this jurisdiction or under our jurisdiction, that they're actually the responsibility and fall into the jurisdiction of a foreign nation. So ultimately, if this executive order goes through and Trump actually does sign it, he'll almost immediately be sued. There will almost certainly immediately be a preliminary injunction, which would stop the executive order from taking effect, and then this would battle out in the courts for probably years, and then maybe we'll get a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court on this, but ultimately there has to be either legislation or probably an amendment. I don't think that the court would rule that such a law would be constitutional. Even the current Supreme Court that President Trump has appointed, I don't think that they would rule that this is constitutional, given the history that's gone on. And a lot of this does come down to your interpretation of the Constitution. There are some people who are originalists, there's some people who are what they call living constitutionalists, which almost kind of effectively renders the Constitution meaningless. But even of the originalists on the Supreme Court, or the textualists, or strict constructionists, whatever you want to call them, which are usually the conservative justices on the court, I don't even think they would approve or think that this is constitutional, given the history, given the legal precedents. But I do certainly think it can be argued, and I don't think it's completely out of bounds to suggest that illegal immigrants giving birth in this country, that their children wouldn't necessarily become citizens, because as Trump said in the video, we are the only nation in the world that allows this. That's not technically true. I think he was talking about developed nations, but even then, Canada's the only exception, other than us, that allows for birthright citizenship. All the other developed countries in the world don't have birthright citizenship, so we are an exception to the rule, it seems. There are some non-developed countries, especially here, in Central America and South America, they have some birthright citizenship statutes, but we seem to be the exception. And it's fair to say that when the 14th Amendment was written, they weren't thinking about, or they certainly didn't intend for this to apply to illegal immigrants who are coming here and giving birth to children, and those children being citizens. Because, they're not talking about separating families, saying, okay, well, you're a citizen, you're born here at 1 year old, but we're going to deport your parents. I mean, no rational person would think that would be the case, or the purpose of the 14th Amendment to allow for a circumstance or a situation like that to happen. So that's the
Alright, so let's square this away. First of all, there aren't these massive swaths of immigrants coming into the country like, yeah, we're going to have a bunch of babies and get citizenship. It's actually very, very rare that actually happens, considering all the immigration we get. Secondly, there isn't really any legal precedent to do this at all. And third, your example of the diplomat completely ruins your point, because immigrants are subject to our laws here. I mean, illegal immigrants, not immigrants. They can be deported, which means that their children who are born here are citizens.
cartridge or round. This full thing is called the cartridge. It's comprised of the actual bullets, which is this tiny little piece up here that you see, this copper piece at the top, the brass casing, or the casing, which is this whole thing from the, this copper area down. It's this whole brass casing here. So that's the longest part of the cartridge. And then on the back here, you might not be able to see it, but that is the primer. And that's what the firing pin hits. It ignites the gunpowder, which is held inside of the casing, and that propels this projectile forward, this copper, this copper-coated projectile. So that's the bullet. This is the actual thing that flies. The rest of this brass casing is what comes out and is ejected from the side or the top. It's just ejected from the gun. From when you see in the video games, those things coming out the side of the gun, but not out of the barrel of the gun going towards your target. Now, the AR-15 round is a .223, or you can consider it 5.56 by 45 millimeter. That's what the AR-15 round is. Let's compare it to the next size up, which might be the AK-47 round, which is 7.62 by 39. So this is the AK-47 round. Now, I'm going to hold it at the bottom levels are going to be lined up here. But you can see, although the AK round is a little shorter in stature, it has way more mass at the projectile portion. So you can see, look at the difference between those projectiles. I would almost venture to say it's double, if not triple, the weight of the 5.56 AR-15 round. So this is a much bigger bullet and can do a lot more damage. So that's the AK-47 round. Now let's go up even slightly more and compare it to one of the very popular hunting rounds, which is the .308. So this is the .308, and I'm lining it up at the bottom here, and you can see this round is so much larger than the AR-15 round, and it's way taller as well. More gunpowder, travels at faster speeds, does way more damage. Now this is like your deer rifle round right here. Anything from like a 270 to .308 and a little bit higher. These are like deer cartridges. You could potentially use this maybe for elk as well. .308 is a very popular hunting round, but it's also a very popular round in the AR-10 or an FAL, other semi-automatic rifles as well. Now we can move up to another popular hunting round, which is the .30-06. Now I'm lining it up at the bottom again, and you can see this is much larger than the AR-15 round. The AR-15 round is almost like a glorified .22. It's one of the smallest calibers out there, for a rifle. Almost all other rifle rounds are going to be larger than the AR-15 round. So you can see the difference here, and I'm not cheating here. The bottoms are lined up here. I'm not blocking it or anything, so you can see the difference. So that's the difference in the rounds. And you can Google the ballistics yourself. I might include some of it here, but the evidence is clear by the rounds. The round of the AR-15 is nothing special. It's nothing crazy.
Now, despite the fact that the AR-15 is actually one of the most highly modifiable weapons we have available to us as civilians, and attachments like Hellfire triggers and gun cranks can be added onto there to make it simulate automatic fire, the AR-15 can actually be modified to shoot higher calibers, including 50 Beowulf.
22B, black male homicide offending rates by age 1980 through 2008. This is the rate per 100,000. We can see in the early to mid 90s, there was a pretty large spike where the homicide rate for 18 through 24-year-olds, for example, reached over 350 per 100,000, but then dropped by more than half from 1993 to 2008 when it reached an all-time low of 175.8 offenders per 100,000. Now, if you look at figure 22A, which is white male homicide offending rates by age 1980 through 2008, it might look sort of similar to the black graph, but notice on the y-axis, you're actually missing a 0 from the end. So while the rates look similar, they were actually 10 times higher, roughly, on the black graph compared to the white male graph. So while the all-time low was 175 per 100,000 for the black males 18 to 24, the all-time lows for the white males was around 20 per 100,000. So basically the homicide rates for the black males 18 through 24 were almost 9 times higher than the rates for white males 18 through 24. So remember, in the clip, Bloomberg also said that whites get stopped disproportionately too much compared to the blacks, because one of the things people were outraged about was how disproportionately compared to the percentage of the population that blacks and Hispanics were getting stopped and frisked compared to whites, whereas if you looked at the rate of crime that they were committing, whites were getting stopped too much, is what Bloomberg was saying. And if we look at the data, based on what I've already shown you, and how much they got stopped, that's absolutely true. Let's look at the rates at which people were stopped and frisked. So this is from the ACLU of New York stop and frisk data. And if we scroll down, we can see a graph that shows the number of reported stops by year. And starting in 2002, where they have the best data, there was about 97,296 stops. And then they reached a peak in 2011 of 685,724 stops. And then it dropped down dramatically. In 2017, there was only 11,629 stops. So let's scroll down and look at the breakdown. And let's pick the peak year of 2011, where we can see there were 685,724 stop and frisks. And we can see that 53%, or 350,743, were black, 34%, 223,740 were black, and 61,805 were white, or 9%. So remember, stop and frisks are about finding things like weapons. You believe that the person is armed when you're frisking them. That's the only reason the courts give you permission really to frisk a person, is if you believe that they're armed and dangerous. This is per Fourth Amendment jurisprudence like Terry v. Ohio. And if we add up the numbers, we can see 87% of those that were stopped were black and Latino. Whereas if you remember the numbers from earlier about homicides and those involved in shooting incidents, that was roughly around 95% were black and Latino. And only 2.5 to 3% of those involved in homicide, murder, or shooting incidents were white. So in this instance, you have 9% that were white. So they're being targeted 3 times higher than their proportion of those who actually commit the crimes. So once again, Bloomberg was correct here. Now, of course,
Wow, talk about mental gymnastics, my dude. Before I dunk on him with the facts, the data, let's attack the logic of his argument. So he's comparing the violent crime rate between races, between blacks, whites, and Hispanics, to the stop and frisk rate of blacks, whites, and Hispanics. But he already said that the stop and frisk is used to find illegal contrabands like weapons. So you're comparing violent crime to possessing a weapon. That would be like if we were at a pie eating contest and I compared a blueberry pie to a strawberry cake. What sense does that make? I mean, this guy is known for playing with data and stats to fit a narrative. Go watch my previous video on him. He literally just lied and misled people with data. Oh yeah, and this is all null and void anyways, because the facts show that not only is it actually true that blacks were targeted more than whites, disproportionately, but even then, whites were actually more likely to have contraband on them than blacks during stop and frisk. Just a little fact I thought you guys should know.
like 26.4%. You know what I mean?
The problem is we don't know how many people are in these groups.
Sure, so we can make general. So
No, we can't.
Think of it like this. What was like the biggest sort of white nationalist, neo-Nazi like event that pretty much got all these white hate groups together in one place in the last like few decades?
Charlottesville, or
Charlottesville, correct? How many people were at Charlottesville, for example?
if I had to guess, I'd say like maybe 1,000.
No. The best estimates they seem to say is like 500 to 600 maybe.
Okay.
Right. So, but for black hate groups, we're not even going to take all the black different types of hate groups are. Let's take just the black Hebrew Israelites. They had a rally, I think, just like 2 years ago, and it was over 800 people at a march in freaking Tennessee. Just that one group, not even including the Nation of Islam people or the other types of black hate groups. Just that group, they had a rally of over 800 plus people, already outnumbering all of the different white nationalist, neo-Nazi.
You're giving me the numbers of people that showed up across 2 different marches, and you're going to try to extrapolate this to how many people exist in hate
What's more
groups
evidence
across-
than you have to suggest that
No,
maybe
so-
white nationalists have more people.
So again, I
in
understand.
proportion.
Yeah, so I understand again from our earlier conversation. I know the statistics are hard, but what you just brought up isn't evidence. If anything, it's anti-evidence. Like bringing up like portions or
How is it
something.
anti-evidence?
Because if you get evidence in a way that it's not gathered in a good way, you could actually like increasingly distort your perception of an event, such that having no information would anybody worth their salt, like whether they're an academic, whether they're a criminologist, whether they're an economist or a statistician, would comfortably come like, oh yeah, proportionally they do. Because it's very, very, very hard to ask like, what does it mean proportionally? So let me give you another example of this. Proportionally, Hispanic people seem to commit more violent crime in the United States than white people when we separate out Hispanic and white people. That seems to be the case proportionally when you look at all the numbers. The Cato Institute did a big response to this and said, well, when you start breaking out people by age groups, the median age of a Hispanic person in the US is like 20 years younger than that of a white person. Old white people don't commit violent crimes. So when you start breaking out in age groups, proportionally, Hispanic people actually commit a lot less crime per capita than white people if you break it out in age groups. Now, which one is proportional, which one isn't? I don't know. You can make really strong arguments.
That's not true.
what I just said, you disagree with that?
Yes.
Okay, I'll find this Cato thing real quick, and then
No, I don't have the data. I can send you this right here. This is called CDC adjusted, age adjusted for homicides, for example, right there. That's an age adjusted stat.
rate per 100,000. What does age adjusted mean here?
They adjust for age. So the difference in age distribution, because maybe Hispanics have a lot more young people than white people do, they adjust for age in these in this graph.
So this is Hispanic, and this is Hispanic. Okay, I'll take a look at this later, and I'll see if the Cato study
Cool
addresses
graph,
this. Yeah, I'm sure you got a lot of race-related graphs related to
Dude,
homicides.
why do you have to be so bad?
No, I'm not bad. It's really funny that like these are the ones that you have. Like, hold on, I got this one about Mexicans. Like, you have like real quick.
All I did was type in CDC age-adjusted homicide, and it pops right up.
Why is this only homicide? You have the ones for like all violent crime, or
This is the one I just came up through the top of my head, age-adjusted for homicide, because I think homicide is one of the worst crimes there.
okay, but like rape or any of that shit doesn't.
Well, you realize rape is a harder crime to categorize than something like homicide, right? Because obviously homicide is literally, it's not, they don't even have to say murder. It's just homicide. Like a person killing another person. It's kind of clear when that happened.
Okay, sure. I will. Yeah, I mean, I'll look it up. Unfortunately, I don't have this data offhand, so I have to look at it. If it's anything like any COVID stuff, I'm sure that there's a lot more to say here. But regardless, walking back to the African Americans are the ones who disproportionately attack Asian Americans. From the crime statistics that I saw, it looked like twice as many hate crimes by white people were committed towards African Americans than it was like numbers like 35 versus 70, which by the way are also really small numbers. I don't know if you care here or not about the fact that they're small numbers.
You're talking about total numbers. What's the hold on, 35 versus 70?
Yeah, it was the I think for 2018 was the. You can
You
look up.
realize what the portion of the populations are proportionally, right?
Yeah, but the question is, do we use proportion of the real quick. This last link you gave me, this is deaths by homicide, not homicides committed.
What's that?
I think. This says deaths from homicide were identified using the International Classification of Diseases. These weren't homicides committed. These were people that died due to homicide.
Yeah, but hold on. Yeah, you realize, you understand how most people within a race, for example, kill people of another race, right?
Yeah, it's possible. That's why we go by victimization sometimes.
Possible?
Yeah, that's why we go by victimization sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop because of related heart problems, arrhythmias and stuff, and the there's a name for like the length of time between heartbeats. That
QT prolongation.
Yeah.
And
most of these.
mostly associated, like I said in our last discussion, which maybe you discovered this, is typically with the pairing of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin.
That's
right?
literally what Trump was suggesting on Twitter.
Sure, but that's not what I was saying.
I thought we were
In our
defending
discussion,
Trump's statement.
are we discussing Trump's position? Because I already told you I disagree with a lot of what Trump says. Or are we discussing our positions on this?
Okay, well, so then what is your position on heads of state recommending drugs that have scant research available to support them?
So I remember with Obama, with the Obama.
Why are we talking about Obama?
Wait, does this not matter? Like,
No,
past
it doesn't.
presidents?
I don't care about Obama. What are we talking about Obama for? What was that pivot? What the fuck?
How is that? How you don't think like how we compare what current presidents do versus other past presidents, like, and how the media was reacting to them at all? Like that doesn't matter.
No, we're talking about right now. If Obama was recommending drugs for people, then I would say that's equally fucking stupid.
Well, not.
Now, you might be saying to yourself, Zemos, what could possibly be worse than all of those examples you showed? Well, what if I told you that, and I'm not joking about this, he lied about the reason why black people vote for Democrats? Can you guess what he said? I'm gonna tell you anyways. He believes that it's because black people just want welfare. No, I'm not joking. That's literally what he believes. And the way that he comes to this conclusion is by a level of mental gymnastics and intentionally cropping things that I can't even begin to tell you. So why don't we just hop on into it, and you'll see exactly what I mean.
What's up, guys? NuanceBro checking in, and today we're going to be talking about Kanye West's visit to the White House and the comments he made about welfare and the black community. And here are the comments that he made.
You know, people expect that if you're black, you have to be Democrat. I've had conversations that basically said that welfare is the reason why a lot of black people end up being Democrat. They say, you know, first of all, it's a limit to amount of jobs. So the fathers lose the jobs, and they say, we'll give you more money for having more kids in your home. And then we got rid of the mental health institutes in the 80s and the 90s, and the prison rates just shot up.
Now, these comments drew criticism from all over the media, but we're going to focus on three particular media reactions to these comments. So the first reaction comes from Roland Martin. Let's take a look.
First of all, if anybody understands history, African Americans were largely Republicans after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so you can look at the numbers. When you look at the African Americans who went into Congress, the U.S. House, as well as the U.S. Senate, they were black Republicans.
Roland is correct here when he says that a majority of blacks were Republican in the Reconstruction era. But none of that contradicts Kanye's claim about blacks voting Democrat due to welfare. Welfare didn't exist during the era of Reconstruction, so that point's kind of irrelevant. But let's...
Well, no, the point isn't irrelevant. Tell me, why did blacks vote for Republicans at the time, even though there weren't welfare benefits? It's almost like black people will vote for things higher than welfare, like, oh, I don't know, their basic rights and civil liberties or something. Crazy.
And it didn't change really until Herbert Hoover came with the Lily White movement. Still had significant black support on the Republican side, but black folks were saying they were not strong enough when it came to civil rights. The shift really started with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Why? Because of New Deal programs, not welfare, New Deal programs that also greatly benefited white folks more than they did African Americans.
It's funny that Roland mentions Herbert Hoover as the turning point, because Herbert Hoover received a majority of black votes during his successful election, and even after the Great Depression, where most of the country turned against him, he still received the majority of black votes when he was running against FDR. FDR, in fact, actually got quite a minority of black votes. He only got a handful. Now, this did change under the New Deal programs, which were essentially the first sort of national welfare programs under FDR. But it wasn't just blacks. The entire country kind of swarmed up and decided to vote for FDR en masse, and they re-elected him 4 times. Well, I mean, they elected him 4 times, but, re-elected 3 times, I guess you could say, but he was elected 4 times. And this was obviously due to coming out of the Great Depression and then also fighting the enemy during World War II.
Yeah, so NuanceBro is just wrong here. The reason why blacks voted for people like FDR more and switched to the Democratic Party was because people like FDR and his constituents were coalition building with black leaders and civil rights leaders in general, and were switching to more progressive politics. Meanwhile, people like Hoover were instituting the Lily White movement, which was anti-black, designed to regain the Southern vote, the Southern white vote. But, for someone named NuanceBro, he couldn't even be bothered to look this up. He literally just says, hey, if that president had a welfare program, that's the reason why black people voted for him.
Republicans still got a significant number of black support in 1952, 1956, even 1960.
I guess this depends on what you mean by significant, because after 1932, blacks never voted majority Republican ever again in a presidential election.
Well, so I mean, he said significant, and I think anything above 25% is significant, but okay.
So one could argue that after FDR instituted his increases in federal spending, expanding the scope of government, and basically creating the first sort of welfare programs, that blacks were really in favor of that and started voting less and less for Republicans and more for Democrats who supported these policies.
Sure, you could, if you're a moron who hasn't looked at the evidence.
So Kanye West is dead wrong. He lied. Black folks did not turn Democrat because of welfare. In fact, the most dramatic shift took place in 1964, when it was Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona who declared his opposition to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That is when it all changed. Not welfare, Kanye. It was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So on that point, whoever told you that doesn't know what the hell they're talking about.
So here Roland talks about Barry Goldwater and LBJ, and he basically said blacks voted for LBJ because Barry Goldwater was opposed to the Civil Rights Act. But this is a little bit more complicated and it's not as clear. First of all, LBJ was kind of known as a notorious racist. Even Obama noted that in his first 20 years in Congress, he opposed every major civil rights legislation that ever came up. Conversely, Barry Goldwater was not a segregationist, nor was he any kind of racist. He was in fact a lifelong opponent of racial discrimination. At the beginning of his political career as a city councilman, he had led the fight to end segregation in the Phoenix public schools. His first staff assistant when he went to the Senate was a black woman. He was a member of the NAACP. Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act because he believed as a conservative that the federal government did not have the power to compel states to conform to its idea of racial equality, or to dictate to individuals whom they must associate with. Even the executive director of the NAACP, although he disagreed and did not support Senator Goldwater, said he does not believe Goldwater is a racist.
This is the basic disagreement between the Negro community and Senator Goldwater. They don't think he's prejudiced. They don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's a racist.
So, what NuanceBro just did there was mislead you. He just lied to your face. You notice how that clip was abruptly cut off? Well, I'm going to play a much better version of that clip that's going to give you a full context as to why maybe black people didn't vote for Barry Goldwater. Let's play it, shall we?
I will never vote for a public accommodations clause in any civil rights bill because I think it's unconstitutional. I think it tampers with the rights of assembly, the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom of property.
In my home state, we have very few public places that remain segregated by pointing out to business people that it is morally wrong to practice discrimination, and it's also economically bad. This type of approach, while I know it's time-consuming, it is having its effect, will have its effect, and I think it will achieve what we want.
Well, like what year? In 1967, in 1979, in 1983. Is it okay during the intervening times that a black kid in a high school baseball team can't stay at a motel?
This is the basic disagreement between the Negro community and Senator Goldwater. They don't think he's prejudiced. They don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's a racist. But they can't go along with a man who says we ought to let what's going on in Mississippi be settled by Mississippi, and the federal government ought to knit or do something else. This we can't take.
On the eve of the convention, 40,000 people, half of them Negroes, demonstrate against Goldwater in the largest civil rights demonstration since the March on Washington last summer.
I am compelled to urge Negroes and all people of goodwill to vote against him. His election would be a tragedy and certainly suicidal almost for the nation and the world.
Yeah, guys, because that sounded like people only wanting to vote for a president because of welfare. Definitely no huge policy implications like, oh, I don't know, your civil rights.
LBJ was elected for a myriad of reasons. He was the successor to John F. Kennedy after he was assassinated, and he kind of used that to his advantage. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 just 10 days before the Republican National Convention, and due to this, he actually gained a lot of Republican votes. Also, LBJ used the very effective tactic of playing on the fears of Americans of nuclear war. Just a few months before the election, the movie Dr. Strangelove came out and actually really stoked up fears about nuclear war in the United States, and a lot of people saw for the first time what a nuclear explosion looked like. And it led to LBJ running what is even today considered one of the most controversial political ads in history.
7, 6, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
But what he also did, which is what he's probably most known for after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, is his Great Society program and his war on poverty, which he campaigned on. These are the programs that led to the creation of the modern welfare state and modern welfare programs we know today as things like Medicaid, food stamps, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So for Roland Martin to say that Kanye is wrong about this is completely inaccurate. The two examples that he cited as the reason for why blacks voted less and less Republican and increasingly more Democrat just so happened to also be, FDR and LBJ, which resulted in the biggest expansion in federal spending and federal welfare programs that the country had ever seen, and what they created essentially what is the modern welfare state today.
So yeah, like I said before, his argument is literally just, these people had positions on welfare when blacks voted for them. That must have meant that black people voted because of the welfare. What a fucking ridiculous line of reasoning. Oh yeah, and the fact that he just blatantly misled people on the quote by the NAACP member there. Really nice stuff, NuanceBro. Of course, he has done these shady tactics before of intentionally cropping shit out. So, in my first video of NuanceBro, I originally said that he was center-right. I don't think that anymore. I've seen enough of him dog whistling and doing other crazy stuff on Twitter, on YouTube, to make me think that this guy is probably, I'd say alt-light, maybe. But more importantly, NuanceBro is, by every modern, sane definition of inductive reasoning we can draw, a propagandist. He will literally lie, manipulate data, do anything to convince you of his narrative. Whether it be hand-waving studies, whether it be comparing two things that don't even make sense to each other to prove a point, he will just do anything to convince you of his narrative. And the worst part is, he calls himself NuanceBro. It's so ridiculous. Like, that's the cringiest name I've ever heard in my life. And people follow this guy. It's ridiculous. But I mean, that's how it goes, It's just the same with PragerU. The propagandists get to spread their lies and they get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views. And people actually telling the truth barely get any. But hey, you can support a truth teller here and subscribe to Zemos HD. God, I feel cringy self-promoting.